Halo Wars is a real-time strategy game developed by Ensemble Studios and published by Microsoft Studios for the Xbox 360 way back in March 2009. I did not get to play that edition, but I did play through the definitive edition, which was a pre-order bonus for the upcoming Halo Wars 2. As with all reviews, I'm going to be looking at the following 3 criteria: gameplay, presentation, and lasting impression. Gameplay will cover controls, progression, and functionality. Presentation will cover graphics, frame rate, and information displayed to the player. And lasting impression will cover key plot elements and that wow factor, something you think about long after the game has been played. I'm a veteran of StarCraft, Warcraft, Command & Conquer, so I understand the challenges of taking a keyboard and a mouse control set and trying to overlay it into a controller. For the most part, though, this system actually works. It does yield slower battles with an overall smaller troop count. However, it does put more emphasis on what type of troops you have, where the placement is on the map, and what kind of upgrades they have going into battle. Unfortunately, keyboard and mouse controls are the standard, and taking that control scheme onto a controller is the deviant. Now, we expect more advanced maneuvers from our games, and unfortunately, the controller has a very hard time doing that. For example, you can't control groups. You can't assign groups. You can't say, okay, I'm going to make all these units dynamically control group 1, all these units control group 2, and then I'm going to press 1 and 2 on my keyboard to toggle between the 2 units. You cannot do that on this game. All you get is local units and all units. And that is very difficult if you're trying to do anything other than a blob attack, where you put all your units in a blob and just say, march forward. We'll talk about that in a minute. So you can't actually flank with your troops very well unless you're hitting local units. And what will happen is units will get left behind, and you won't realize it until you're seeing random green dots on the map, and you're like, wait, why aren't you with the 4? What are you doing? And it does fall apart. There are no waypoints, there are no patrol routes, there are no hard stops for defense. The control scheme really does struggle in this capacity. And I want to show you a quick video of exactly what I'm talking about. So here we have an army that's slowly being built up, and I want to start moving units around to show you how difficult it is to control groups of units in an effective manner. Let's say that I wanted to have the Warthogs over on one side and I wanted to put the Wolverines over on another. The only way I can do that right now is I got to click on each individual unit and drag them and click where I want them to go. I can alternatively select local units, and what I have to do is I have to move the camera around and position it such that only those units are shown on the screen. And then when I do that, that's not a problem. Now I can control just those Warthogs. But if the Warthogs get too close to the Wolverines or any other unit and I want to control just those units again, I have to pan the camera down and move around. And this doesn't necessarily work in the heat of battle, especially when you're trying to flank and move around. And that's why ultimately you end up doing something like this. You select all your units and you say, guys, go forward and figure it out. Now the game will do its best that it can to try to keep the units together, which is nice because Warthogs are much faster than Spartans on the ground. However, you'll see what happens when you do this select all, and if you're not careful, it forces you to micro, but it doesn't put the systems in place to necessarily allow that. So here you can see an engagement. That Spartan on the front is taking an absolute beating. Look at how many units are shooting at that enemy right now. 1. And that's the Spartan because he's the closest. All these other units which are set to attack are sitting in the back doing absolutely nothing. So I have to click on them and drag them around and say, no, I want you up here. So Sergeant Forge, he's a hero unit. He has a special Warthog. He shoots a lot faster. He would be great up front. Spartan 42 Douglas, he would be great up front as well. And you have to start moving people around, but you can see what's happening here. The units don't understand that they kind of wiggle out of each other's way. They are very, very rigid in where they're parked. What happens is, like this Marine, he has to take the long way around. Now, if another Wolverine or a tank or something was in this chasm, what would ultimately happen is I would not be able to advance, and that Marine would get stuck. And it's very, very frustrating. So you have to constantly manage how your units are placed, and you have to constantly manage where they're going to be. But it's very hard to do that because they're very nearsighted. And as soon as they see an enemy to attack, they're going to forget what you told them to do and they're going to start firing. And it's up to you to really kind of maneuver through this. Now, the other thing I want you guys to notice is that I'm only at a 12 count on my army. That means I have another 18 units or types of units. Some things require more than one unit to build up. So if I had more warthogs or tanks, you can imagine how hard it is to navigate some of these smaller spots to say, hey, I want everybody to focus fire here. And it doesn't happen that way. And that's what really hurts this game. This game does support the Microsoft Play Anywhere initiative, which is really nice because you can play on your Xbox One or on your PC. And thanks to the cloud, you can jump back and forth with your save, and it is pretty seamless for the most part. However, traditional and keyboard mouse controls in this game do not work like they do in the games I mentioned before. There are no dragging or highlighting units as you would expect with your mouse. And the controls are actually worse than they are on the controller, believe it or not. Now, I suspect this was done primarily to keep the competition of PC gamers in line that with Xbox One gamers, but it is frustrating that there wasn't more options in how to actually control your army and play it in a more traditional real-time strategy control scheme. Controls aside, though, base building and unit diversity is simple and effective. So building in this game is actually pretty easy. You just select on any available slot in your base and you can build numerous things. Supply pads, which give you more money, reactors, which give you more power, field armories, which are used to upgrade troops to more advanced capabilities, air pads for air vehicles, vehicle depots for advanced ground units, and also barracks for ground troops. Now, there's a lot of different strategies on how you want to start out, but I find it's easiest to just build a few supply pads, maybe a reactor or two, which is going to increase your tech level, which will allow you to build some of the more advanced units. And then I usually start off with just the barracks. Something that's nice about this game is that you don't have to worry about building basic warthogs, which are going to be your primarily scout vehicles. You can build warthogs right from the base. There is no other building required in order to get a warthog up and running, which is really kind of nice. Also, around each base that you build, you'll notice that there's these little spots which you can put in turrets. Now, the game does do a very good job of preventing you from building up too fast, because they will start throwing more units at you if you just sit too long and you start teching up without actually completing the objectives. And those turrets do eventually get overrun, so you can't just rely on them entirely, which is kind of nice. The other frustrating thing about it, though, is that you can upgrade turrets, but it takes an incredibly long time, and by then units are going to start crushing you. So you really need to be mindful of that. The game does employ a rock, paper, scissors method, in which that infantry units beat air units beat vehicles, and vehicles beat infantry. You do have these unique hero units, like the Spartan group that joins you, or Sergeant Forge, who really can turn the tide of battle. But there's not enough of them. And what ends up happening is you don't get much of a personality behind them. And it is very easy to get attached to the 3 Spartans you have, because they're going to do most of the heavy lifting for you in this game. Levels are nice because levels are a traditional mix of the build and destroy the enemy and these weird story missions that really do make you think on how you're going to control your units. There's a really cool level, a particular highlight that I really liked. You remember the scarabs from Halo, the giant, big, like 4-legged monsters that you had to take out in Halo 2 and Halo 3. Well, in this game, you come across a scarab, but only the head has been built. The body isn't done yet. And what happens is this head is sitting on like a pedestal, and it can slowly turn back and forth and pan. And it's up to you to take your armies and hit it in its blind spot. And that's really a lot of fun. And because of that, I feel like you do get a good balance of gameplay from these traditional levels and these unique levels. There's a lot more like that. I just wanted to focus on that one. Inside the levels themselves, there are tons of hidden weapon caches and skulls and these black cases that are the data briefcases. Now, those will unlock additional lore in the overall timeline. Now, the timeline's neat because it shows you main events in the Halo world, and then it inserts where the UNSC Spirit of Fire is during all these events. And it's really kind of cool because, in a sense, you kind of observe what's going on in the greater world while you're getting to have your own main adventure. Now, ranks, points, and achievements are there if you want them. There's a lot of optional objectives that become clear as you start working through the level. Some of them are actually pretty tough. However, each level is self-contained. So if you get all the tech upgrades in the world, and if the level is such that you build a base and then there's a cutscene and then you kind of start playing on that same level again, unfortunately, everything that you had is lost and you have to start over again. And this is really unfortunate, especially when your Spartans can commandeer vehicles like wraiths or ghosts, and they can really lay down the hurt. You're going to have to turn the keys over when you start a new level. But again, this isn't anything unique to this game. It's just something worth pointing out. In terms of presentation, this game looks very outdated. I struggled throughout my entire playthrough to determine what the definitive edition of this game was. There's no added goodies such as video filters or toggling between old graphics and new graphics. There's nothing that really makes this an oomph experience. If you played this game on the Xbox 360, there's no reason for you to play it again now. And this really made me think that this remaster was really just a gimmick to get me to pre-order. Now, I was excited because I hadn't played the story before. So in that sense, Halo Wars 2 being somewhat of a sequel to Halo Wars 1 does matter. So I got that story element, but that's about it. I didn't feel like it was a revisitation or a celebration of the original game, much like 343 has done with some of the other Halo games or some of the other definitive franchises in other genres. I was always aware of objectives, and I was always aware of what I needed to do. The information was conveyed very clearly to me. There's always major prompts and like, hey, go here, hey, do this. I never felt like I was wandering around. Not that the maps are enormous, but it was very clear what the win conditions were and what the lose conditions were. Optional objectives only became clear after you began them. So you might see a unit flying around and kill it, and suddenly it'll pop up and say, hey, go kill 100 more of those. And it did add to the importance of exploration because of this, and of building a diverse army to handle all different types of units. Because certain units do excel at taking out other units. If you had an army of just ODSTs, for example, you were going to have a really hard time against some of the heavier vehicles. And it's nice to have a good mix of units. And I feel that that objectional quest system really does force you to have a diverse army and be really ready for any situation. Because a lot of times you think you're going into battle to fight something, and then halfway through, the battle shifts and you're fighting something entirely different. Let's talk about my lasting impressions. There were some amazing missions, as I mentioned before, particularly with the Flood. The Flood plays a very important part of this game, and their units are very, very different than the Covenant units you'll face. So that really did lead to some really interesting battles that I had a really good time and a lot of fun playing through. What this game does, if nothing else, is it really cements the legend of the Spartan. Especially in this cutscene. Now, I want to show you guys this cutscene. This is later on in the game. This gives you an idea of how badass Spartans really are. Check this out.
Gentlemen, we're burning sunshine here.
It's active.
Sergeant. Lieutenant? Take care of those elites. He's mine. Let's go.
Like the
rest of your race weak and undisciplined. There will be no female to save you this time.
Look me in the eye and say that.
As you wish. My face will be the last thing your pathetic eyes ever see.
And for the record, I would have kicked your ass the first time if the lady hadn't stopped me.
That cutscene blows my mind. Now, I didn't get to dabble much in the multiplayer because it was really hard to find a match. Although I do think that multiplayer probably wouldn't be very much fun in this game because it's so difficult to micro and because it's so difficult to pull off advanced maneuvers against other human players. You're basically going to both build armies and walk in and auto attack, and you're just going to see what happens. That doesn't sound so much fun to me. Not in the way that you flank and counter units like in StarCraft or in the Command & Conquer series. But despite that, I think if you're a true Halo fan, and let me tell you, I am a true fan in every sense of the word, I think you're going to enjoy Captain Cutter, and you're going to enjoy his adventures, and you're going to see and learn about a new ship that hasn't really been explored much in any of the other main Halo games. But one thing bugs me. There's a hollow, cheap death of a character towards the end of the game, and it really lacked emotion. Now, I know that sounds like I'm beating this up, but it really felt bolted on. And as I mentioned before, the timeline is really neat. You do get to see how your ship is involved in the overarching world of Halo. But everything you did was so self-contained. These guys are fighting the Flood while Master Chief is fighting the Flood. They don't seem to talk to each other, which is very odd. It's not like Master Chief got on the comms and says, hey, wait a minute. There's this really weird race of aliens down here called the Flood. We need to let everybody know. That really didn't seem to happen. Now, you could argue that when they crash landed on Halo with the UNSC Pillar Autumn, maybe they didn't have good comms, but it just doesn't really seem to add up. And for that reason, it does feel like it's very bolted on. It doesn't feel like it's part of the great universe, and that is really disappointing. It feels like this is an optional objective while the real adventures are taking place with Master Chief. This is like an optional, like, oh, meanwhile, these people are doing something over here. But in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't add up much to the lore, and it doesn't really add up with other things that are consistent in the Halo universe. And I don't want to give spoilers away, but if you've played the other Halo games, I think you'll understand what I'm talking about. So for that, it really was hard to embrace the characters and some of the plot points because they felt so disconnected, not only in the story because the acting was really dry, and there are great actors in this game, but just overall in their emotion and just kind of what their purpose was in this world, it was really hard to connect. And even with my obsessive love for all things Halo, that really missed the mark for me on many, many levels. So the final verdict, do I recommend you skip this game? Do I recommend you rent this game? Or do I recommend you buy this game? I'm going to give it a rent, and I'm going to tell you why. There's 15 missions that do take about 45 minutes to an hour to complete. If you're more of a completionist, you could probably rush through the game a little bit faster. And it is definitely an RTS light experience, so it's going to be very easy for people who are maybe timid of the RTS genre to dive into. But it does pay some homage to Halo's universe and characters, and it is really a lot of fun to build up a bunch of warthogs and a scorpion and get your Spartans running around and, laying waste on the battlefield. You will get to see some of that established lore, but just don't think you're going to leave a lasting impression in the universe. And this game really didn't leave a lasting impression with me other than that amazing cutscene I showed you guys earlier. So don't expect too much else from this game. So there you guys have it. My thoughts on Halo Wars, the Definitive Edition. Hope you guys enjoyed the review. Get out there and play some Halo. And until next time, I will see you guys on the other side.